Welcome to Michael Potts F1, everything Formula One, but from a photographer's point of view. We have made it into the top half of the standings as part of this review into the 2022 season. As always, we're looking at which teams and drivers have succeeded in 2022 and which ones have been wide of the mark. Today we're going to be looking at McLaren in 5th place. And as usual, I'm going to be looking at them through the lens of my photographs, picking out some key shots during the course of the year and talking about why they were significant. McLaren end up in 5th place, down from 4th place last season, but only 14 points behind Alpine. You have to imagine McLaren's goal for the season was to be fighting for wins and podiums, and not in a tussle for best of the rest, and not even achieving that. It's another team that you have to take a hard look at and ask, what's gone wrong? Last season, they managed to win and 6 podiums, whereas this year they only managed 1 podium. They just looked off the pace. Occasionally, when they did manage to qualify ahead of a driver from the big 3 teams, they were quickly overtaken in the race. We do need to talk about Daniel Ricciardo. He's looked completely lost this season. It's unimaginable how someone of his class, his experience, his skill, failed so spectacularly. It was like watching someone with the yips. It's like he completely forgot how to drive. And for it to have happened over 2 years, where the car design philosophy couldn't have been more different between the 2 years. I remember in 2021 watching the unveiling of the new McLaren and Daniel Ricciardo being presented as the new driver. There was such a fanfare. He was seen as a huge step up from Carlos Sainz, multiple Grand Prix winner, someone who had bested Sebastian Vettel at his prime, had gone toe-to-toe with Max Verstappen. It was kind of heartbreaking actually watching Lando Norris in this situation because he was struggling to compete for attention with Daniel. And it really felt like this larger-than-life personality was coming into the team and was going to overpower everything. However, over the next 2 years, Lando proceeded to absolutely destroy Daniel in a way that I don't think I've ever seen anywhere else. Not to the same extent where the younger driver has destroyed the more successful, more established driver. Daniel's failure is just part of the problem. Look, if they had 2 Lando Norrises, there would have only been a distant 4th. The Woking-based team has much more ambition than that. They don't want to be competing for best of the rest. They want to be competing for titles, for championships. The car generally seemed to be quite reliable, but it was a little bit inconsistent. There were some tracks that it was completely out of sorts. For example, they looked pretty good at the opening testing in Barcelona. And then when we went to Bahrain, they were nowhere. In that opening race, both cars finished like 15th and 16th. But then Lando scores points in the next race in Saudi Arabia, and there's a double points finish in Australia. And boom, Lando scores a podium in the 4th race in Imola. Where does that improvement come from in such a short space of time, with minimum amount of development? In the hands of Lando Norris, it's the 4th best car. But it has some peculiarities. It's not great on all tyres. It's not very good when there's heavy fuel loads, like at the start of the race. It's decent over a single lap in qualifying with low fuel and fresh tyres. But those inconsistencies must have been a nightmare for the engineers. The highlight was a 3rd place in Imola. The low light must have been the realization that they would have to let Daniel go midway through his contract. And the dream that they had at the start of 2021 was never going to be fulfilled. Head-to-head, Lando Norris versus Daniel Ricciardo. This is the most lopsided driver comparisons of any team. Lando was completely dominant in the inter-team rivalry, to the point that it looked like they were racing in different cars. He's just been so much better, and McLaren's inability to find a solution to improve Ricciardo over the past 2 years is staggering. To have margins of 20-2 in qualifying between the drivers, or 14-4 in races where both cars finished, or 122-37 in points, it's devastating. You can't help but feel sorry for Ricciardo. His career has imploded in the most spectacular way. It's resulted in him returning to Red Bull as a reserve driver after being paid not to race. This is someone who many thought was a potential world champion. What is amazing is despite everything that went wrong, The week in, the week out questions from the media, the constant drubbing he got from his teammate, he still managed to hold his head up. He was very honest and still managed to smile all of the time. A break from the sport could be exactly what he needs. Going back to the place, Red Bull, where it worked for him, could help him find his joy again. There is a possibility that there could be a race seat at Red Bull in 2024 if the relationship between Max and Checo continues to fall apart, and assuming that neither Tsunoda or De Vries do enough to take the step up. But at 33, he's at the wrong side of his career to be taking a year out. Others have done it. Hulkenberg and Alonso are two examples, but this just feels a little bit less probable to me. There weren't any teams willing to take a risk on him this year. I can't see how that's changing next year. The first photograph I'd like to show you comes from the Singapore Grand Prix. It's a slow shutter speed shot as his car passes in front of the National Gallery. One of the tricky aspects of shooting night races is that the lights of the track are often so much more powerful than those of the surrounding buildings. In post-production, you really need to try and bring these elements into a better balance. In this shot, I've tried to change the point of the panning downwards and to the right. This means that many of the linear elements, such as the light streaks, are at an angle, and this increases the sense of movement in the shot. The key to getting this right is to make sure that your camera is stable during the pan. Here, I'm using a monopod to help give me the stability to achieve that. This was Daniel's best result of the year, 5th place. And it was good to see that he was able to pick himself up after we'd all just learned that he'd no longer be driving for McLaren next year. The second shot comes from the Belgian Grand Prix, sparking up the hill to Radion. The 2022 cars sparked differently to their predecessors, and sadly not for the better. In 2021, we got this glorious, consistent rooster tail of sparks. And now we get short, sporadic, haphazard, and definitely not photographically satisfying sparks. You can understand why. The floor is far more important in 2022, and no one wants that valuable aerodynamic surface to be ground away during the course of a race, just to please some photographers. But here, in qualifying, the McLaren was spectacular. Sadly, in this case, when the car is photographically great, it's not necessarily great in terms of results. Daniel only managed 15th, and this is on a track that he loves. He was a past winner here and has been on the podium a number of times. While Lando bossed the inter-team rivalry, last year was much better in terms of results for him. Think back to how agonizingly close he came to winning his first race in Sochi. This year, he just didn't have a car to produce such heroics. He might have been a better driver this year, a more consistent, more bankable, higher achiever, but I'm sure he would have loved a few more trips to the podium. He signed up to McLaren until the end of 2025, which sounds like a long way away. At that time, he'll only be 26. McLaren definitely need to deliver a car that he can be a contender with if they're hoping to keep him beyond that. He's shown he has the skill and the speed to fight with Max, Lewis, Charles and George. He just needs the car. He's a remarkable young man. He's half English, half Flemish. He was born in Bristol, grew up in Somerset. He's incredibly mature. He's been very open about some of the struggles he's had with the pressures of being a Formula One driver. And he's used his platform to raise awareness of mental health. He's won 5 junior series. He was second in Formula 2. And he's competed in 4 seasons of Formula 1. And he's only 23. This photograph comes from the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix in Imola, the scene of his best result of the year, 3rd place. It's taken during the race in the final sector of the track. The shot's taken at a 13th of a second and captures him as he races past the Ferrari fans. It was a great result for the team, and yes, he did benefit from Leclerc's moment of madness, but still, he's the only driver not in a Red Bull, Ferrari or Mercedes to get a podium all year. The next shot comes from the Italian Grand Prix, and is Norris leaving the pit box. I've managed to get both high up and quite close as the car comes out. The slow shutter speed blurs the back of the car, giving you a sense of speed. It's always exhilarating shooting in the pits. You're so close to the cars, and you see what truly awesome machines they are. Norris got 7th place in the race. He actually ended up with 7 7th places over the course of the year, and ended up 7th in the Drivers' Championship, which is best of the rest. McLaren are in a tricky position next year. They have lost their team principal Andrea Stella, who's moved over to Alfa Romeo Sauber to lead that team as it becomes Audi. They've promoted his replacement internally, Andrea Stella, who has a very good reputation. He's actually ex-Ferrari, but he's been at McLaren for a very long time. He came over with Fernando Alonso. This whole move and this change was quite unexpected, and I can't help but seeing that's going to disrupt them in some way. They have a new driver replacing Daniel Ricciardo, fellow Australian Oscar Piastri. Oscar came into the team with a lot of drama, so there's going to be a lot of media attention around him at the start of the year. He has amazing junior series credentials, but McLaren is a hard place to cut your teeth. Norris and Hamilton have both managed to succeed, but others haven't been that successful. It'll be interesting to see how the relationship develops between the two drivers. McLaren are at a disadvantage compared to the other top teams, as they're the only ones who don't manufacture or control their own engines. And this has to have an impact on their freedom in design and their ability to deliver championship-winning cars. Thank you for watching my deep dive into the McLaren Formula One team. What did you think of their season so far? Do you have any idea what went wrong with Daniel? Was there anything the team could have done to have prevented the situation from happening? And how do you see new driver Oscar Piastri fitting into the team and competing with Lando next year? Do you see them improving on their 5th place next year? There's a link to my shop in the description below where you can buy photographs of the McLaren team. And I've added a discount code where you can get 10% off any purchase. With 4 more teams left to review, I'll see you soon. Goodbye.